hopefully you have some questions for him. So let's just get started. Again, we have Ryan Gedney, Senior Economist with the Department of Labor and Employment, Jeff Fitzgerald, Division Director, Unemployment Insurance, and Cher Hovland, Chief Communications Officer. So a week ago, we reported that we hadn't seen a real significant element of fraud that other states had. And again, the last 2 weeks, we have been seeing a slight uptick in that. And I think some of you appropriately noticed in yesterday's release an increase in the PUA claims activity, which was unusual. In the last week, we did see an increase of about 7,700 from the week prior. That was not to be expected. And so in the last 48 hours or so, we were able to do a little bit of a deeper dive into those claims, and we attribute that increase to a couple of factors. Number one, claimants who were previously exhausted, we were trying to funnel them into the PUA application, and we actually contacted those individuals within the last week to encourage them to go ahead and now submit applications into the PUA application. However, the increase in PUA claims didn't really account for just that one factor. So a deeper analysis revealed that of about 5,600 payment requests that were made within it was actually on the first 2 days of the week, 5,600 of those looked suspicious to us, and I won't get into the criteria we're looking at because we certainly don't want to tip off fraudsters on how to commit unemployment insurance fraud. But of the 5,600, we actually stopped payment on just about half of those before payments went out the door. Those were new claims, and so what we're seeing is that the fraudsters are, as we mentioned last week, using stolen identity, filing a PUA claim, requesting back weeks on that claim. And as you know, recently we reported that folks could go online and actually request assistance with backdating. And per the federal law for PUA, claims could be eligible for backdating as far back as early February. So if you think about if somebody is just now filing a claim and they're requesting back payment as far back as February, that's a significant amount of benefits that could be coming to them. So again, the uptick in claims is mostly suspected fraud, about 5,600, half of which we stopped benefit payments on. Those were the new claim filers that were requesting back weeks. The balance of that 5,600 also that were suspected fraud, we stopped payment on. Now, just this is to say that we stopped payment, but certainly a degree of those may not be fraud. And I might turn it over to Jeff to speak about how we'll be addressing that. But this really is a process change for us. A couple of things we've mentioned in the past. The PUA system, the way the law was written, the eligibility criteria, as every other state has seen, unfortunately does lend itself to a certain element of fraud. We're happy that we were able to detect and prevent this fraud from occurring and the benefits from going out the door. To the tune of about 30 million if you include the backdating that was now available to claimants. And so we've instituted a couple of process changes. One is we will only allow backdate of PUA claims up to 1 week. If there's a legitimate need to backdate further than that, an individual will have to call the PUA call center, which, by the way, is separate and apart from our regular call center, so they won't be experiencing long hold times, and they will be able to get in and speak to an agent much more efficiently than our regular call center. But they will need to, if it's a backdate request more than a week, they will need to go in now and speak to an agent to do so. And we realize this will be a slight inconvenience for those legitimate PUA claimants, and we'll do everything we can to help get them their benefits timely. At the same time, we also realize we need to do everything in our power to identify, detect, and prevent fraud at every opportunity, and that's with PUA claims and regular unemployment. And the last thing to note is just, again, the PUA claims are funded by the federal government. So yes, we are able to detect and prevent this fraud activity. It's critical because regardless of who's paying for it, it's still fraud. And our goal is to stop that from happening. At the same time, these aren't state-funded benefits. So these are not benefits that are coming out of the state's trust fund, which we've reported previously is near solvency in the next couple of months or so. Insolvency, sorry. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to see if I've missed any critical parts about the fraud update.
Thank you, Cher. I think you touched on many of the relevant components. I would just add a few details. By eliminating the backdating, that change went into effect this week, mid this week, and we already saw about a 40% decrease since we made that change. We saw about a 40% decrease in new claim activity. So we do think that that was one of the more pronounced factors that was drawing fraudulent claims to the system. So we stand by that decision. And also it logically makes sense. In other words, it's mid-June. And so what was logical in April may not be logical today in terms of programmatically. So again, based upon federal guidance, it was determined that claimants could have had an impact going back to early February in terms of their inability to garner their wages if they were independent contractors. And so having backdates to that time period when the program opened in April 20th makes complete sense. We're now 2 months later. So it'd be somewhat illogical for someone who had legitimate impact to their income going back to February to just now be filing a new claim in June and applying backdates all the way back to February. So we stand by that decision. The other thing I will mention is, as Cher, said, we recognize that of the roughly 5,600 people whose claims have been stopped, high degree of confidence that those were appropriately stopped. There may be some individuals that have legitimate claims within that mix, but it's going to be the vast minority of those claims. I will emphasize that it is permissible to be an out-of-state claimant and file within PUA if you had independent contractor work and the like in the state of Colorado. So we could have some out-of-state claims coming into that system. We are prioritizing Coloradans in terms of when it comes down to triaging folks that might be in that mix and adjudicating claims to get payments out. We're prioritizing in-state Coloradans to get those benefits out to those individuals first. But I think Cher touched on all the other elements that are germane to this conversation.
And to just address Vinny's question, so last week we reported we are working with local law enforcement, the FBI, the Secret Service to identify this fraud and put measures into place to stop it and investigate it further. This is a scheme that, as Jeff mentioned, it's multiple state claims. And so I would say the vast majority of states are seeing a similar scheme using PII and stolen identity, unfortunately, and specifically within the PUA system. Again, because of the eligibility factors within that program, it does lend itself to a higher instance of fraud. Jeff, I think our investigators shared this with us. I think folks have heard about kind of the out-of-country fraud rings that are being detected. And in fact, I think some of the information we've received and that we're sharing with law enforcement does indicate that we are seeing that activity outside of the U.S. as well. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, without getting into too many specifics for obvious reasons, it's fair to say that there's some domestic issues that we're dealing with as well as some overseas. Just would reiterate some speaking points from previous meetings, and that is that we are collaborating effectively with all the relevant national, state law enforcement agencies to deal with issues where it's beyond just the state of Colorado. It's more national. So we're confident about our internal activities on this, as well as how we're coordinating and collaborating with law enforcement on these national and international issues.
And so again, 5,600 suspected fraudulent claims, about half of those we were able to prevent payment on, that we're requesting back weeks to the tune of over 34 million. and the rest were active claims in flight. And so working to prevent future payment on those claims as well.
And so to the question in the chat box, the 34 million that Chair referenced, that's what we prevented from going out. That's not how much went out. That's how much we prevented by our activities this week. That's how much we stopped.
Anything else on this topic? Well, we can certainly address this later in the call, but I think I'll go ahead and send it over to Ryan because he does have a lot of information to share with us. Ryan, if you're ready.
Thanks, Cher. And my talking points will again cover the employment situation that we sent out this morning. But again, as always, I'm always happy to answer any questions related to unemployment insurance data as well. The data I will discuss today are based statistics rate, labor force, total employment, and the number of unemployed are derived from a survey of households, otherwise known as the current population survey. Simply put, the household survey is meant to capture the employment and labor force status of individuals within Colorado during a given time. The household survey also includes the self-employed, independent contractors, farm workers, and those not attached to a traditional payroll employer. However, we are unable to break out those individuals at a state level. Non-farm payroll estimates come from a survey of business establishments and government agencies and are intended to measure the number of jobs, not the number of people employed. These estimates exclude employees in agriculture, private households, and the self-employed. As we noted in today's press release, the reference period for the establishment and household surveys was the pay period or week that contains the 12th of the month. Therefore, these data provide a snapshot of Colorado's employment situation during the first stages of the governor's stay-at-home order, which resulted in a return to work for some Coloradans. Revisions to May data, along with preliminary estimates for June, will be released July 17th. And so now for results from the household survey, May seasonally adjusted unemployment rate was 10.2%. That represents a 2 percentage point decline from April. April seasonally adjusted unemployment rate was revised upward from 11.3 to 12.2% and stands as Colorado's highest unemployment rate since comparable records began in 1976. In comparison, the U.S. unemployment rate in May was 13.3%. That's a decline of 1 4/10 of a percentage point compared to the month prior. In May, Colorado had the 21st lowest unemployment rate in the nation. Nebraska had the lowest rate of 5.2%, and Nevada had the highest rate at 25.3%. 43 states experienced a decrease in their unemployment rate from April to May. Colorado's drop of 2 percentage points was the 20th largest in the U.S. Last month, I mentioned there were 5 counties with not seasonally adjusted unemployment rates of at least 20%. This month, there are 3. San Miguel had the highest at 22.1%, Gilpin 21.3%, and Pitkin at 20%. 7 counties had unemployment rates below 4%. Like last month, the counties with very low unemployment rates are all concentrated along the eastern part of the state, have small populations, and have low levels of leisure and hospitality employment. Among the 7 metropolitan areas in the state, Denver had the highest unemployment rate at 10.4%. The other 6 metro areas had rates ranging from 8.2 to 9.7%. It is recommended to compare all the sub-state rates I mentioned to the statewide not seasonally adjusted unemployment rate, which was 10% in May. Last month, I provided an estimate that roughly 80% of unemployed Coloradans in April were on temporary layoff, meaning the individual expected to return to their employer at some point. That share dropped down to 2/3 in May, but that change was not due to an increase in those permanently laid off, which stayed relatively flat last month. It will be important over the coming months to look at the estimated shares of unemployed individuals either temporarily or permanently losing their jobs for both Colorado and the nation. When looking at the number of employed individuals in the state, that share rebounded slightly in May. Last month, approximately 59.7% of Colorado's 16-plus population were employed. That figure was at 58.3% in April. In February, when the seasonally adjusted unemployment rate for Colorado was at a historically low 2.5%, Colorado's employment to population ratio was 67.7%. While the employed ratio is low for all types of educational attainment levels, those with less than a high school degree have been the most severely impacted. Finally, we estimated in April that about 10% of those employed individuals were working part-time but would prefer full-time hours. That rate was approximately 7% in May, which could be a reflection of individuals receiving more hours as business activity begins to pick back up. Shifting to the establishment survey, the preliminary estimates show that on a seasonally adjusted basis, the state added 68,800 jobs from April to May. Not surprisingly, that is the largest over-the-month increase in payroll jobs Colorado has recorded. The prior record was 20,000 in April of 1999. The gains in May bring Colorado's total number of non-farm payroll jobs up to 2,539,900, which is a similar level of employment from June 2015. The private sector represented 117% of the monthly increase, adding 80,800 payroll jobs. An estimated 12,000 government jobs were lost in May. The revisions to April's payroll job figures were surprisingly small, as they were only revised downward to 2,300 compared to what we reported last month. Combined with March and April revised numbers, the state lost 342,300 payroll jobs from February to April. Therefore, the May gain of 68,800 represents a recovery of 20% of those lost jobs. A similar analysis of the change in U.S. non-farm payroll jobs in May reveals the U.S. gained back 11% of lost jobs from February to April. While April payroll numbers experience relatively small revisions, it will still be important next month to see how May figures are revised. Additional responses to the establishment survey are key in determining how much payroll jobs are revised from one month to the next. At the industry level, most major industry sectors experienced significant over-the-month gains in May. The exceptions are information, government, and mining and logging, which all experienced varying degrees of job loss. I will highlight the top three gainers, since this was also covered in today's press release. Leisure and hospitality added 29,700 jobs in May, which is 43% of the state total of jobs added in May. Those job gains represent a recovery of 18% of the 161,200 jobs lost in leisure and hospitality from February to April. As a reminder, the majority of leisure and hospitality employment is concentrated in hotels and restaurants. Job gains for education and health services totaled 23,000 in May. However, the healthcare and social assistance portion of that sector added the majority of jobs. Those job gains represent a recovery of nearly 50% of the 46,900 jobs lost in education and health services from February to April. And other services payroll jobs rebounded by 6,700 from April to May. Those job gains represent a recovery of 28% of the 23,600 jobs lost in other services from February to April. The other services industry includes personal services like barbers and nail and beauty salons. Of those three industries, other services, leisure and hospitality, and education and health services represented over 50% of all industry level initial unemployment insurance claims filed from mid-March to mid-May. Finally, I will cover jobs added by metro area. Again, we do not break out non-farm payroll jobs estimates by county. Either education and health services or leisure and hospitality were the primary industry gainers in each area. So just kind of going from most jobs added to the least jobs added. Denver added, again, this is on a seasonally adjusted basis. Denver added 18,600 payroll jobs. Colorado Springs added 7,500. Fort Collins had a gain of 3,500. Grand Junction had a gain of 3,400. Boulder jobs grew by 3,000 in May. Pueblo added 1,500 payroll jobs, and Greeley added 1,300 payroll jobs. And as always, I think I threw about 40 data points at y'all. We're going to send out those talking points so everything's clear. With that, I'm happy to take questions. I think, Wayne, you sent a question. Eating and drinking places increase. They're not serving, but I think we've loosened the stay-at-home criteria. So I believe people are going to go out. There's some data that we're looking at too that sees that individuals are going to retail, are going to recreation places more as time has passed since April. Takeout has been extremely popular as well. I do takeout all the time. I'm just an anecdote, but I think that could explain some of the return of eating and drinking places. But again, I think that we'll have to see how that plays out over the next couple of months, as dining options will be limited for sure. Aldo asked, are the unemployment numbers lining up with what you expect given continuing claims? Yeah, I would actually say the trends are fitting pretty well together in terms of when we look at initial claims data, when we look at what the unemployment rate is doing, is it's ticking down slightly, and in terms of what we're seeing in the job numbers as well. All right, so Dan asks, on the labor force summary, I'm seeing a drop in seasonally adjusted government employment. Is there a way to estimate how many of those losses were full-time workers compared to part-time seasonal? Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to really dig into that full-time, part-time component. A lot of the drop was in local government, particularly in the education sector. If you think about all the support workers that are in local education that, unlike teachers, aren't able to work remotely, I think that's maybe explaining a lot of that loss we saw in government. And I'm not seeing any other public questions. I mean, in terms of, seeing continued improvement in the unemployment rate, that's to be determined. Again, we've had a number of revisions, these past couple months as well. So it's possible that, again, we see an upward revision in May's unemployment rate. I think the U.S. rate, when that comes out at the beginning of next month, will be a good indicator. Like I mentioned, 43 states did see a decline in their unemployment rate. So I think the U.S. rate, which will come out again 2 weeks prior to our June Colorado rate, might be a good barometer for that.
Ryan, update on the trust fund?
So the trust fund, if memory serves me correct, has around $550 million, probably between $500 million and $550 million. Benefits paid out for regular UI, it was around $84 million for the week prior, for last week. I expect that to be closer to $90 million for this week. But again, we've really seen pretty consistent numbers in terms of continued claims, where it's ranged between that 240,000 to 260,000 weekly amount. And benefits, again, have ranged between somewhere around 85 to 95 million. yeah, when we were talking in April and early May, it was possible, kind of looking at trends, that we would have seen benefits at 100 to 150 million. But again, that's been a lot lower. So that will continue the solvency of the trust fund. So we've talked, I think, a couple weeks ago, perhaps insolvency end of July, early August. Perhaps now that's now late August, early September. That's definitely something that we're going to keep monitoring as time passes. So Ed asked about SB 207. For those who don't know, that has been passed on to Governor Polis for sign into law. That hasn't happened yet, but we're expecting that to happen. But the main takeaway is that this will help kind of shore up long-term trust fund solvency. The wage base over a period of, I believe, 6 years will increase from 13,600 to just a little over 30,000. Then we are also, so the taxable wage base was supposed to increase to 14,300 next year. That will be fixed at 13,600, which is what the taxable wage base is for this year. In addition, with the solvency surcharge will not be assessed to employers. So that will be a cost savings to them for the employer community. So again, the solvency surcharge will be turned off in 2021 and 2022. In terms of running some new numbers per employee basis, we could provide that later. That's just not something we have ran just yet in terms of this call. And let me know if you need further clarification on that. Charles asks, are the higher rates in mountain communities such as Pitkin and Eagle entirely tourism related, or something else contributing to that? Yeah, and Charles, I would say yes. It really is. If you kind of look at the unemployment rates by county, what their concentration is in leisure and hospitality and that tourism sector, I would say there's a pretty high correlation. So I would say those rates are still elevated given kind of what they rely on for their kind of economy and for their industry base. Otto asks, are we seeing the typical influx of graduates into the labor force, or is that more likely in June? Is your sense they might be holding back? We've actually seen, even before COVID-19 impacts hit and we had a really low rate, we were seeing pretty low rates of new entrants into the labor force. Again, a lot of universities, higher education centers had graduations last month. I think it's a little early to really tell if kind of what that influx looks like. So I would probably expect to maybe see that impact over the next couple of months. But I don't have a good sense of whether they're holding back or not in terms of entering the labor market. Okay, a couple more questions here. All right, so will you be able to track how Colorado college students who may choose to stay home instead of grades? Yeah, unfortunately, that's just too granular of detail to really assess on a timely basis. I'm not even sure on a long-term basis we would be able to kind of approximate that, Carolyn. But yeah, unfortunately, there are some things that they're great questions, great things to look at, but there's not great state data to really be able to assess those kind of impacts. All right, Ed asks, given the state's high concentration of workers in tourism sector, why do you think we're doing so much better than the national average in terms of percentage of jobs that are coming back? Part of it could be due to state policy. I think there's been really careful approach in terms of stay-at-home approach, a safer home approach, kind of a real piecemeal approach there. And so that could be accounting for some of that. Again, Colorado typically does outperform the nation in terms of faster job growth, lower unemployment rates. So even though, yes, we do have high concentration of workers in tourism, historically, Colorado does outperform the nation. Again, I'll caution with this data, especially now. 1 month is not a trend. We'll need to look at this over time. I'm really curious how the rest of the year will play out. While May is definitely encouraging, June, July, August will also give kind of indication how Colorado and the nation is recovering from the pandemic and the economic effects from it.
Any other questions? I think we may have been competing with the revenue forecast today, so there might be more exciting news out there to be covered. But I feel like, thanks, Ryan. That was a real great report. As Ryan said, all the talking points will be available after the call, as well as the recording of the call. Oh, and Charles hung up on them to join us. Thank you, Charles. You're so loyal. Okay. Seeing no other questions, obviously, if you do have any follow-ups on anything we covered or did not cover, shoot me an email. We'll connect you with one of us. And one last scan. I think that's it. So we'll go ahead and conclude today's call. Next week, we'll be back on the Thursday call at 10 a.m. Hope you all have a great weekend, and we'll speak soon. Bye-bye.